Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in once again to our DORA Digital Operational Resilience Act videocast episodes. I am Beatriz, and today is a continuation of our last episode on Chapter 2 of the regulation. So, as a recap, we're talking here specifically on ICT risk management, and today specifically, we're going to delve into more details on the ICT risk management framework, incident management, and also testing program, so that we can have a little bit of an overview of what the risk management framework is all about. So, like last episode, I have two guests from the Supervisory ICT Risk and Cybersecurity function with me today, Monique and Nicola who once again they have different roles within our function. So the aim of these episodes on risk management framework is to give different perspectives of what is expected from a financial entity at different stages of the supervisory life cycle. So thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you, Beatrice.
So the first question that I have for you today is in regards specifically to ICT third-party providers. The regulation seems to set a role here for the management of risks that arise between contractual arrangements between financial entities and their ICT third-party providers. But the regulation doesn't really go into too much detail of what expected on a daily basis from someone who's fulfilling that role within a financial entity. So from your experience on a daily basis and on broad terms, what does a person that have such a role do?
Thank you, Beatrice, for having us here once again. So to start off with answering your question, maybe we want to explain that this role that you have explained, to have an outsourcing oversight, someone conducting the oversight of outsourcing, is not a new role. So this is already existing today with the applicable guidelines. And we have seen that with DORA, this role will continue to be there. However, there is one key difference. Because DORA will exclude micro-enterprises from having someone conducting this role or actually designating this role to a senior manager. To answer your question, rather than explaining what is expected day to day, I think it is important that we understand why do we need to conduct this role. So basically, when a financial entity enters into an arrangement with a third-party service provider, or even understanding who the subcontractors are, so we are looking at a chain here, risks will emanate from these arrangements, and the entity needs to understand how these risks will affect its operational risk and also potentially its concentration risk. So the person conducting this role will need to actually understand the risk before entering into the arrangement with the third-party service provider. But also understanding whether 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year down the line, that risk is still within the appetite of the company, or potentially it has changed. And therefore questioning whether the controls that we have applied today to mitigate that risk are still feasible and are still effective a few years down the line. So overall, that officer, from an ICT risk management perspective, he needs or she needs to understand the risks that are emanating from that business relationship, and more than that, how will they eventually develop or change, even, for example, if there is a major change within the arrangement, does that arrangement and the risks emanating from that arrangement, does that still fall within the appetite of the financial entity, and basically continue to assess whether the controls that the entity would have implemented are still effective a few years, months down the line.
Okay, so to add on to what Monique is saying, so this role will have quite It's quite onerous, this role, especially now with the requirements emanating from DORA. I mean, first of all, this is more onerous, obviously, because we are going more towards our outsourcing. More of entities are going to the cloud, for example, more outsourcing. So the first decision has to be is whether to have this new system that is required, whether to have it in-house or to outsource it. So that is the beginning, so a decision, a risk assessment is made on what we should do. Then this person will consider various outsourced suppliers, which one fits best, their services, which one will fit best with the requirements of the organization. What this outsourcing officer needs to consider as well is the security features. Security features need to be at least as good as the ones of the entity. They need to also be in line with what is required by the regulation. Now, we are not saying that this wasn't existing already. It was already there, but now it's being more emphasized with DORA, and perhaps there are more requirements which are specified. So the outsourcing officer would then have to make a risk assessment. As Monique mentioned as well, they need to see what new risks will be coming out of this new arrangement. We, for example, in our inspections, we will see that any risks are included in the risk register and that there are controls. For example, controls will be detailed in the agreement, and then there will be a review of these controls. So when the agreement is entered into, these requirements and controls must be in place. Now, that is not all. After a certain period of time, and this is critical, especially for important functions and those services which are critical, the agreement will need to be reviewed. Maybe every 2 years, I don't know, it depends on the criticality, every 1 year perhaps, to see that the security arrangements and what was agreed upon in the initial agreement is still there, is still relevant, because there might be new vulnerabilities that are not being covered by the agreement. Now, there might be clauses in the agreement that specifies that if there are any new emanating risks, they will be covered by the agreement. If not, it would entail an extra cost, but it is important for the entity to remain in line with the security requirements of DORA. At the moment, we are following the EBA guidelines, but when DORA comes, they need to be in line with the requirements of DORA. And this needs to be an ongoing process for each outsourced service, more specifically the critical services. Now, to add to that, this outsourcing officer needs to report as well to the management body. They need to know the status of their outsourcing, with whom they are outsourcing, what the risks are, and the residual risk that is left after the controls have been implemented, and if there is the requirement for any additional controls in order to remain within the risk appetite.
Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you very much, Nikki, for the very comprehensive answer to my question. So I still have a few more questions on ICT third-party providers. So I think a main point when it comes to ICT third-party providers here that the regulation puts forward is the need to have a register of information with all of the contractual arrangements between the ICT third-party providers and financial entities within scope of the regulation. So what is this register of information all about?
Okay, thank you, Beatrice, for the question. There's a lot to say on this, and I think it is important, and we cannot emphasize enough on the importance of financial entities preparing themselves from this aspect of on retaining this register of information. So basically, I'm going to answer you in 2 parts. The first part, I want to mention that this provision is not entirely new. Today, we already have an element where we would need to, where financial entities would need to retain a register of information capturing outsourcing arrangements. Secondly, this is mandatory for all entities, so there are no entities which are excluded from this provision. And it is important that we say that what we are going to be discussing in terms of this register of information is applicable to ICT aspects, okay? So the key differences from what we actually have today to what we will actually see under DORA is first and foremost that the Register of Information needs to capture all ICT arrangements, making it clear as to which arrangements are considered to be critical or important and which arrangements are considered not to be critical or important. And it also needs to eventually include information on the subcontractors. This is what we already have today and what we will continue to have under DORA in the future. The second key difference is the reporting obligation. So in addition to what we have today, that the authority can request the full register or parts of it, and in addition to notifying the authority when there are new arrangements, we have seen the introduction of a yearly reporting. So entities are going to be obliged to report to the competent authority on a yearly basis on new ICT arrangements. I must add a small point on this, that us as a CIRC function, together with other functions of the authority, we are already working on a solution, to introduce a solution to try and make the reporting as easy as possible. The third key difference is the standardized approach. So basically today, the relevant guidelines, they do tell you what needs to be captured in the Register of Information, but financial entities can use their own template. This will change with DORA because we're going to have a standardized template which needs to basically be used by all financial entities, which is very similar. So the data that would need to be captured within this template is very similar to what we have today. We've conducted an exercise last year, a joint ESA exercise, together with a sample of financial entities. We already have an idea of what this template will look like, and basically it includes the name of third-party providers, unique identification numbers, dates in terms of contractual arrangements when they are entered into, notice periods, renewal dates, what are the services that are being provided by the third-party service provider, and also information about subcontractors, possibly also about alternative service providers. I must say that this is not concluded, so this is something, the template is still to be decided on through an ITS, which is to be concluded early next year. But what is interesting that with this standardized approach, it will not only allow for a more an easier way of retaining data, but what is interesting, it will allow a standardized way of reporting information at not only a national level, but also within the European Union itself. And very interestingly, it's going to allow us to actually map the interdependencies within the financial industry on ICT third-party providers. So that is very, very interesting. So I believe this is very important. There's a lot of emphasis on it. Entities should start preparing themselves in order to revisit what they actually have, and what will be the understanding, what will be the new approach. But that is basically it in terms of the Register of Information.
Okay, I agree with you, Monique, and I think you basically explained it all. At this point, what I can say is, from my perspective, as a person who conducts the on-site inspections in the name of the MFSA, is that when we ask for this list of outsourcing arrangements, sometimes it's not actually in place. They would have a basic list, but they wouldn't have. we haven't found many entities prepared exactly with all the information that is required. So even what is required at the moment, sometimes it's not even in line with our guidelines. So here there is more emphasis on what is required, as Monique just explained, and perhaps the entities can start preparing for what is going to be required in DORA. I mean, we are waiting still for the ITS to be issued, which will be towards the beginning of next year. What we have seen so far from the list is a bit limited, so I think the entities should work a bit on this. But this exercise that Monique mentioned, that was in conjunction with the ESAs on the list of ICT Third Party Providers, also was a help for them to know what is basically going to be required. We cannot say that this is the final template and the final list, because there might be some differences, but we will have to wait and see on this aspect. Once we are doing our inspections, I mean post 2025, we can also ask for the full list. We can make an analysis of what there is in the list, even though this new outsourcing arrangements will be submitted in the list, added on to the list on a yearly basis for the MFSA, and which will be shared obviously by with the ESAs. And this as well, this process, we expect to see it in the outsourcing policy, for example, or in a procedure in relation to outsourcing arrangements, which would explain what this outsourcing, for example, person is responsible for, and that everything is being included in the list.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Monique, just to add, you mentioned the mapping of the interdependencies. I think something that's very important to add here is in relation to Chapter 5 on the management of ICT third-party risk, more specifically Section 2. So Section 2 of that chapter relates specifically to the designation of critical third-party providers, which will be subject to a new level of oversight by the lead overseer. So basically, we're going to have a whole EU-wide framework that will supervise these critical third-party providers. And now it's important to understand that this register of information that you just mentioned is going to help in the designation and further designation, and to keep this list of critical third parties updated. So actually, this exercise that you mentioned will be used to designate these providers, and then every time that we get the updated list on a yearly basis from our financial entries, that information will be relayed to the ESAs, and based on these level of interdependencies, they'll be able to designate those critical ICT third-party providers. So I think this is very interesting, and of course we'll delve into more detail once we actually discuss Chapter 5 of the regulation. So my next question, let's move away a little bit from ICT third-party providers, and let's talk about other requirements of the ICT Risk Management Framework, which are not inherently related to risk. Yes, they're related, but they go above and beyond. And here I'm talking about specifically incident management and the testing program, which needs to be a part inherently of a financial entity's ICT risk management framework. So again, taking into account your experiences and different perspectives from authorization and on-site, what do you expect to see here?
Okay, Beatrice. So here, let's start with incident management and incident reporting. I would consider that a big part of business continuity, and that is our main reason for being here, so that our business can continue, our businesses won't fail. So during our on-site inspections, we always require a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan, which includes backup and recovery procedures. Now here we are also requiring an incident response plan. I mean, they should already have that. This incident response plan is usually either part of the business continuity plan or it is a document in itself. Now, the requirements of incident response plan and of business continuity as a whole is a bit more specific and maybe a bit more onerous as well, because DORA requires now for the companies to have a business impact assessment as part of their BCP, a crisis communication plan. These these requirements must all be tested. For example, if you have a crisis communication plan, it has to be tested. From our end, when we're doing an inspection, we are going to check the plan. We are going to check that the tests were made to make sure that they work and the results. Any remediation plans on the crisis communication plan, on the incident response plan. So incident response plan, it has to be tested. It has to be documented, first of all. It has to be tested. What were the results? Did they work? How fast did we recover? And it also, DORA also specifies the reporting of incidents, basically, to the authority, and of recording lessons learned and everything that goes with incident management, basically. So what we can see here in DORA is that it is more stressed. These business continuity, incident management is more detailed in DORA than what we had previously. Now, if we go on to the testing obviously is going to be the testing of our systems. We're saying it's going to show how resilient our systems is, how robust our systems are against cyber attacks, for example. So this is a good thing. We can gauge where we stand, how strong we are. Now, an operational resilience testing program is being requested specifically in Article 25 of DORA, and it mentions such testing as vulnerability and penetration testing, network security assessments, physical security reviews. These are just examples. But companies, especially on their critical functions, on their critical systems, they need to perform these tests and provide the results. So in our inspections, we are going to ask for the results. If there are any negative results, what is being done? A remediation plan. By when do these vulnerabilities, these risks have to be covered? So testing is required periodically. And obviously, these will have to be reported during our on-site inspections, basically.
From my end, I don't really have much to add because I think Nikki already explained most of it. But what I want to say is that from an authorization point of view, especially on incident management, we take that from a proactive perspective. So obviously, the company would have not started its operations yet. We see that it actually has implemented an incident management policy. It has recovery and response plans in instances of an incident or cyber attack. But we do actually sometimes challenge how really effective those plans are. Because not just having the plan, you need to ensure that if you have an RTO or an RPO, you can actually meet and that those objectives can actually be met, not only by the financial entity, but the financial entity needs to ensure that if it is actually engaging with a third-party service provider, that third-party service provider itself, if it is involved within that function which has been affected by an incident or a cyber attack, it can actually meet up also to the expectations of the incident management plan of the financial entity and the response and recovery plan of the financial entity.
Thank you very much for answering my question. I think we've covered a lot during these two last episodes. So we've covered the applicable guidelines, we've covered ICT governance, we've covered testing, we've covered TPPs, incident management. That was a very, very good overview of Chapter 2. So I really wanted to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you, Beatrice. It was really nice being here with you again today and for us to provide this information to the entities. Hopefully, it is going to help them in their preparations for DORA.
I'm sure it will help, I'm sure. So thank you very much for tuning in once again. I hope you tune in for next time for our next DORA episode. As I've mentioned, this intends to be an ongoing series in preparation for the upcoming Digital Operational Resilience Act. As usual, and as I said in the beginning, if you have any particular questions, suggestions, queries, do not hesitate to contact us on the email address you can see on the screen right now. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the day.